Easter 1958. The first march between London and Aldermaston, protesting at the morality and sanity of employing nuclear weapons to keep world peace. In the 1960s, in theory, the USA and USSR deterred each other from using them by their capacity to inflict massive damage on each other's populations. This balance of power was the aptly named policy of MAD, mutually assured destruction. MAD. But madness is rarely stable. Fired by intense ideological rivalry on a global scale, both sides tried to gain a technological advantage, either by avoiding destruction at home or destroying the other's weapons on their territory. This unsteady arms race progressed in fits and starts against the wider political background. In the 70s, arms limitation agreements slowed the pace. But later that decade, alongside a change of leadership in the USA and the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan, it quickened dramatically with proposals to install NATO cruise, Pershing and Soviet SS-20 intermediate-range missiles offensively targeted within Europe. The dormant peace movement in the UK revived itself, disturbed by the prospect of cruise missiles based on its soil and the government's decision to build a fleet of aggressive Trident submarines to maintain the independent deterrent that the movement had long wished to unilaterally renounce. Once again, people took to the streets to march and rally in ever bigger numbers. E.P. Thompson addressed the crowd at Hyde Park in 1983.
Congratulations on a fantastic year of campaigning. Now, we've done this against the opposition of arrogant rulers, editors, of bureaucrats who pretend to represent the consensus of opinion in this country. On our leading demands, opposition to cruise missiles, opposition to the Trident, support for a nuclear-free Europe, it's we who represent the majority of the British people.
Individual membership to the campaign for nuclear disarmament grew from 2,500 in 1980 to 100,000 in 3 years, and grassroots campaigning sprouted in new imaginative ways.
For almost a year, Alf and Joanna Engelkamp withheld 45% of their income tax as a protest against paying for war preparations. The Inland Revenue threatened county court proceedings. Alf and Joanna, who lived near Aberystwyth, held their own version of a council of war and decided they would pay but make sure that the Inland Revenue did not have everything its own way. They simply wrote out a cheque for £417.54 on the side of a 6-foot replica of a Trident missile and took it to the taxman. Not without embarrassment, he had to arrange with a bank to cash it.
Some individual initiatives were even more conspicuous. David Barber in Oxfordshire decided to use his farm to advertise CND.
Ever since I was a small child, we've lived under the flight path of Upper Hayford with all the noisy war machines that were flying over there, and painting the symbol on the barn roof seemed to me a very sensible and logical thing to do. So we organised a small party of workers and we painted this 55-foot diameter symbol on the roof. There must have been complaints to the local planning authority because after a fairly short interval we had a letter from the planners telling us that we had to remove it because we would need advertisement consent. I went into it a bit further and decided that I could apply retrospectively for planning permission. Consent was refused, so we appealed to the Secretary of State. 3 or 4 months we had a letter from the Department of Environment saying that they considered that planning consent should be given because it didn't impose undue visual impact in the countryside, which is what the planners turned it down on originally, I think. It all gave us publicity for the peace movement, and of course it worked because the Americans have gone.
More personal exchanges took place on doorsteps all over Britain, not always with happy outcomes.
Oh, do come in. The meter's under the stairs. Have you got a few minutes?
Well, not really. I was going to get the boy from school.
Who is it?
Someone political!
Better times were found when individuals got together in their communities and formed local groups, mostly operating under the umbrella of CND. This was the decentralised bedrock of organisation. Members of one such group in Derbyshire recollect.
I see myself as somebody who just did the ordinary things, delivering leaflets and holding stalls in Gloucester. We used to run petitions and have stalls on Saturday mornings quite regularly, and they were freezing cold in the arcade there, and the pigeons would deposit on your head.
Delivering leaflets.
The
I mean,
leaflets.
how many times did we
leaflet
leaflet Gloucester?
We leafleted the whole town at least 10 times.
I mean, you could tell if anything stupid had happened, if people got frightened over something, because there were more people around the stall on the Saturday.
We must have had, what, at least 300 to 400 members at the peak.
Yeah.
I mean, most of them weren't particularly active, but they were there, they were on the names on the list, sort of thing. And you got the money off them and stuff.
Another thing we did was to produce a newspaper called Glossop Countdown. We produced, I think it was 3 issues of that.
I remember one year, I think it'd be 82, and we actually had a whole weekend of events, didn't we? We had an exhibition in the town hall, we had showings of films and videos. We'd had a public meeting on the Friday. I mean, since remember we had like a whole weekend of things, and I mean, how work that went into that, and it was unbelievable.
And then there was the Bruce Kent and Alban Maitland debate.
Oh,
Yes, yeah, I
I
remember.
couldn't find anybody to come opposing, and in the end she agreed, didn't she?
Yeah.
That's right.
Because I remember we putting the posters up, we bought sheets of hardboard and we cut it up into A3 size. I mean, we spent ages, we pasted all these blessed posters up, we tied them on all lamp posts. Within 2 days, all bar one of them had been taken down. The local Tories had been round and ripped the lot down.
Yeah, the meeting was packed and went down really well. I mean,
Yeah.
and Chris made Olga made one look an idiot.
I think that was one remarkable thing about it, wasn't it? It brought together an awful lot of people of very different backgrounds, all with the same aim.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the skills it found were quite
It was
remarkable.
amazing how well they gelled as well.
Yeah, that's right.
The voices of Lydia Edwards, Jimmy Simpson, Bob and Dot Bowling, and David Bailey. Where the community wasn't the focus, there was a myriad of other identities. Manna, Canna and Sanna, musicians, clergy and scientists against nuclear arms. Mothers, grandmothers and babies against the bomb. The influential medical campaign against nuclear weapons. And gay, trade union, labour and youth CND, as remembered by Claire Melamed and Sarah Young.
CND very cleverly let Youth CND get on with it and run their own games, combined to make it incredibly attractive. We were allowed to do things which other organisations shut down their youth organisations for doing.
One of the things that I remember particularly is the Youth CND Summer Tour. It sort of combined those two things that I really enjoyed about Youth CND, which was the sort of political involvement and the actual sense of being involved in something on a kind of organisational level and making things happen.
We organised about, well, it was 2 coach loads, so 100 kids who came on 2 coaches with us around Britain, and I think the places we went to were based on where we had either thriving Youth CND groups or where we wanted to set up Youth CND groups, so it was quite carefully thought about. And we did a whole series of different events which were brilliant fun, I remember. Like, we did early warning sirens playing and then lying down and drawing chalk outlines on the people in the middle of shopping centres. We did leafleting, we did talks, meetings with the local Youth CND groups.
You know, one thing I remember really well is going into that chip shop in, that's probably Cambridge, and just walking into a chip shop and saying, I'd like 150 portions of fish and chips, please.
Wasn't that what sent us over budget for the whole thing?
Certainly, yeah.
Somewhat more experienced in life, perhaps, a group of ex-servicemen banded together, including a contingent of war veterans from the Indian Army.
My name is Rajendra Singh Tat. I came here in Britain in 1963. We have seen the war. The war is not a good thing for both parties. Whether they win or lose, I think both are losers. So we used to go for march with CND from 1986 to I think 90 or 91, and after that people were getting old and could not walk properly, so we stopped it. It is my own thinking that there should be peace in the world.
And people had their own views within the peace movement. It was never monolithic. Heated debate took place, for example, on key issues such as how to apportion blame for the intensified Cold War, whether Britain should stay within NATO, the role of the Labour Party. All this tended to be eclipsed, however, by the superpowers feuding and the evident folly of weapons escalation, added to by plans for neutron bombs, MX missiles, and the grandiose Star Wars program. Against this, the peace movement targeted more down-to-earth aspects of government policy, especially its plans for civil defence. This was torn between the need to persuade both the enemy of our willingness to use our weapons and suffer destruction, and the British public that if deterrence failed, we'd cope anyway. This was the message expressed in the booklet Protect and Survive.
Action before attack.
Have you strengthened the outside walls and the floor above your fallout room? Have you painted all windows that are not blocked up, taken down net curtains? Have you put the following items into your fallout room?
Portable radio, 2 if possible, and spare batteries. Improvised lavatory seat, polythene buckets fitted with covers, strong disinfectant and toilet paper. Enough food to last you and your family for 14 days. A clock and a calendar.
Action on attack warning.
Have you sent the children to the fallout room? Have you filled the bath, sink and wash basin with water and covered them? Have you remembered to push in any aerial on your radio?
Action after attack.
Have you taped up the handle or removed the chain from the lavatory? Have you done any minor repairs to keep out the weather? Have you checked that any small fires in any part of the house have been put out? Have you checked your survival kit?
Not surprisingly, this produced alarm amongst bewildered public officials. From the Portsmouth Evening News.
Victims of a nuclear strike in Bognor would be given burial at sea, the town's neighbourhood council's been told. A guest speaker said, "We're very lucky here because we're by the sea, so all the dead people can be taken out in a rowing boat, weighted down and buried."
Just along the coast in Kent, the local population appeared to be even luckier.
Claxdall will be safe in the event of nuclear war because Russia cannot spare more than 2 bombs for the whole of Kent, its parish councillors were told last week. The number of bombs available for the whole of Europe would not allow it to squander more than a couple on the county. The only suitable targets would be Chatham and Dover.
Other more realistic local authorities devised their own idea of a nuclear-free zone, a policy of non-compliance with civil defence plans. Manchester led the way in 1980, making, for example, its own studies into the effects of nuclear war. Fred Barker.
Nuclear-free local authorities weren't concerned simply to engage in this sort of guerrilla warfare with the Home Office about the implementation of civil defence regulations. They also wanted to look outside their immediate environs and ensure that they were using the information, for example, that they were gaining from these planning assumption studies to produce educational materials, campaigning materials. So, for example, a lot of the results of these studies appeared in civic magazines or civic newspapers. Some authorities produced booklets, pamphlets specifically containing the results of the studies. Others even went as far as producing videos.
In Greater Manchester, local government civil defence planning is trying to take proper account of the effects nuclear war could have. The City Council is currently involved in a study which is examining the possible effects of nuclear war on the area.
The study is called the North West Planning Assumptions Study, and it is looking first of all at the effects of a nuclear attack on Britain, and in particular how it would affect this northwest region. Well, we've looked at 2 attacks. One is an attack on major military targets in the United Kingdom, and in Greater Manchester itself, that attack would cause about 500,000 killed immediately from a population of 2.5 million, and another 500,000 seriously injured.
Spreading the message was a major preoccupation of nuclear-free local authorities. Bradford, for example, ran a billboard campaign, and I think the slogan was "Visit bits of Bradford before bits of Bradford visit you." Those sorts of initiatives at the time were very important in an area where you had a lot of the messages that you were trying to get across on road signs, in billboards, perhaps posters on the buses, for example, is one of the things we did in Manchester.
By 1985, there were about 180 nuclear-free zones, and Wales had become, in effect, a nuclear-free country. The government was forced to abandon plans for at least one major exercise, entitled Hard Rock, renamed Hard Luck by campaigners. Not that the Home Office wasn't into the name game, changing the much-mocked civil defence into civil protection. In 1986, emergency planners were still trying to come to terms with the peace movement.
I'm with them all the time in trying to get rid of these wretched weapons, and I'll go along with them. What we can't get across them is that we are on parallel lines. And let me give you an example, if I may. I used to be responsible for training scientific advisors, and we went to our annual seminar where we played an exercise. At the end of that time, a rather pompous gentleman got up and said, "When is the government going to do something about these left-wing weirdos from CND?" And there was a deathly hush because the chap sitting alongside me had been wearing his CND badge all the way through. And he turned around and he said this: "Left-wing I am, bearded I am, weirdo I am not." I've been a member of CND ever since I was about 16. I want to get rid of weapons. I believe they're immoral, and I will do everything in my power to get rid of the nuclear weapons in this country. But I'm also a realist. I realise that time is not on my side, and it may be that we won't have time to get rid of them. So what I want is an insurance policy.
Perhaps weirdo was the right description. By then, we all knew about nuclear winter, the catastrophic and truly uninsurable effects on world climate of even a limited nuclear exchange. But bleak winters were endured by those living at the peace camps set up by campaigners outside military bases. These became a crucial focus of public attention, as did the blockades and invasions of the bases, resulting often in arrests and imprisonment. The most celebrated was begun at Greenham Common, Berkshire in 1981, where 96 cruise missiles were to be deployed. Lorna Richardson, Lynette Edwell and Jean Kay experienced its highs and lows.
Somebody said, "Anyone want to come to Greenham next weekend?" And I said, "Yes, I do." We gathered about a dozen or so women and hired a minibus and went out there, and I was hooked.
Well, Greenham dawned on me very unwillingly. I was a member of Newbury Campaign Against Cruise Missiles, and despite an extensive local campaign, we were getting nowhere until the women and men and children walked in on the march from Wales. And then they went up to the camp and said they would stay there until there was a debate. And the debate never came because no one was interested. So for the first year, they simply stayed there. The media ignored us, and gradually it grew. And because of that year's grace, it actually grew from the bottom up.
A lot of women came to Greenham because it was women only. A lot of those women wouldn't have come if it had been mixed because they'd already had experience of being not deliberately excluded, but unthinkingly excluded, shouted down, kept out of the way. You know, one of the strengths at Greenham is that you didn't have to be articulate. You didn't have to be able to produce a sort of fully fledged political doctrine the instant you set down your rucksack.
Greenham's strength was that it was women only, and certainly when you were doing non-violent actions, it was a lot easier, because the police didn't have the excuse.
December the 12th, 1982.
Some 30,000 women ring the 9-mile perimeter of Greenham Common Cruise Missile Base in Berkshire yesterday in an emotional demonstration against nuclear weapons. In such an inaccessible part of the country and in appalling weather conditions, it was a remarkable show of strength of the anti-nuclear lobby.
The nitty-gritty of Greenham was actually when there weren't hundreds of women there. There were just a few women, perhaps at each gate, sitting it out in the cold and the mud. And I don't actually like descriptions that talk about women huddling round the fire. We were always huddled round fires. We were never sitting round them, according to reporters. Somebody started what they called hot food run. The reason was it was winter, the women were being evicted a lot. By the time they were sure the bailiffs weren't coming again, it was dark and they were tired. And so we had a voter of taking hot food out.
Fairly recently I started, when I was pissed off and when people came up and said, oh, how do you manage? And I started to say, actually we're not managing very well at all, we can't cope. And it is too cold, we're all getting rheumatism, but that's not the real problem. We're freaked out, we can't stand anymore, we're exhausted. Then people just don't get they just don't, they just ignore it. And then they get frightened by it. Yeah, with the cold. Yeah. And you just say, well, I just said we don't cope with any of it. Oh, you're so brave and strong, we couldn't do it. No, nor can we.
It very much depends what sort of mood the bailiffs are in as to what the eviction is going to be like. Because the police do nothing, then the bailiffs very much dictate the terms, and if they're in a very aggressive mood, then they'll come out and they'll try and take as much stuff as possible. And if we haven't packed things up very carefully, then they'll take what they can get their hands on. And sometimes they'll take whole prams, they'll try and take people's personal possessions. Other times they'll arrive and they'll be really quite laid back and they'll let us pack up, which is what is supposed to happen.
It isn't nice to block the gateway. It isn't nice to go to jail. There are nicer ways to do things, but the nice ways always fail. It isn't nice, it isn't nice. You told us once, you told us twice. Thank you kindly for your advice, but if that's freedom's price, we don't mind. Oh yes we do, we mind. Indeed we do, if that's freedom's price, we mind.
January the 1st, 1983, women entered the base and danced on the silos.
We don't want your laws. We don't like your cause. We won't fight your wars. Captain Greenham!
I was appalled by the media reaction. At first I thought it was just a matter of misunderstanding, but then I realised how deliberate it was. The first year of Greenham, we got very little publicity at all. This was such a powerful argument that we had housewives' registers and women's institute and mothers' unions all down backing us. And it took 24 hours for the press to change all this. Women who blockaded were represented as lesbian, dirty, behaving like women shouldn't behave. These women are anti-men. They are not looking after their families. They do not have careers. Therefore, why should they have a voice? And that to me was a really shocking image. And it persisted. It was very, very difficult to get on to the issues involved, which I always regard as intensely simple. It was always, how do you live? Where do you pee? How do you manage to wash? And it was just extraordinary.
The first to do so this morning was 73-year-old Nell Logan, a grandmother and the oldest of the peace protesters. She said she had lived through 2 world wars and couldn't just... Thank you very much, you piss! For God's sake, I'm doing a piece to camera to put your protest in a logical, in a way that people will understand. And to make out that you're making some sense and you're going to clown around in the background. That doesn't do your case any good at all.
But look, woman, I mean, we are clowning around us to get our spirits up, and we are here, all right?
It may be the way
I don't need to put makeup.
I'm here to put your case.
All right, but put it then, and don't get aggravated by me.
The bloody thing won't be used if you're doing cartwheels in the background.
But why?
Because it'll be distracting and the assets won't use it.
November the 14th, 1983, the first flight of missiles arrived.
Once crews came, we realised we needed a present at every single one of the gates. And that was how the other gates were gradually born. Each gate had its own particular core of people.
Emerald Gate was tiny. It wasn't on the road, it was right in the woods, right by the silos. So you could have a good old look when, you know, stuff was happening inside the base. You were right by the runway.
Violet Gate was lovely. Violet Gate were the very young, pretty girls who were on good terms with the soldiers, who always called things like Geoffrey and Neville. Violet Gate would have to take their curlers out and adjust their dresses before they could ever go out anyway. They couldn't do anything quickly. Violet Gate were always the ones who were passed cups of tea by these soldiers and always had a fire going because the soldiers kept an eye on them.
Blue Gate had, in many ways, the worst trouble. They got the pointy end of the stick in that, like when the bailiffs come, they'd turn up at Blue Gate first thing and be incredibly brutal. I remember waking up one morning to find in a bender, in a sort of plastic shelter lined up with all the other women, to find a bailiff slashing the plastic above my head.
Green Gate used to be the muesli eating gate. It had a wonderful skateboard and cycle action. It was great fun. It was the gate nearest the silos, and the women there were very vulnerable. They constantly had their possessions stolen, and several young women were seriously attacked there.
You tended to get women who were more interested in the sort of spiritual aspects and spiritual ways of dealing with political problems. The symbol of the web, that was a very, very early symbol, and that was both sort of practical, political and spiritual thing connected with the earth and the sort of power of the spider and all the rest of it, but it was also a political symbol. It wasn't a straight line from A to B, it was a network, and a network is always far stronger than, you know, a sort of hierarchical organisation or a single figurehead or anything like that, in that you can poke a hole in one part of the web, but there's always going to be the whole rest of the web that's going to carry on, and sooner or later the spiders can come running along and mend it.
October 1983, women dressed as witches to celebrate Halloween and cut down 200 yards of fencing.
Decisions were usually made by consensus. They would have what we call money meetings, because there were a lot of women there who were on income support. There were foreign women who weren't entitled to it, and they got what was called Camp Dole. So there'd be a money meeting, and one particular gate would be responsible for the money that month, and then it would go to somebody else. So it was totally democratic, and people put in requests for what money they wanted, and then it was decided yes, yes, or no.
It's not just a question of waste, but different people's ideas about what is extravagant and what isn't.
Yeah. Who has the power to say people do this and they do that? You mustn't drop in the mud. Collectively, we all do.
But collectively...
supposedly, but it doesn't work that way.
No, well...
You can make it work more that way.
Well, we do... I mean, it is expensive. You know, now that there's lots of publicity and there's lots of things going on, we also need a lot of money. I mean, we go through a lot of money.
I don't like the power of it.
Are you being just anti-technological?
No, not at all. I don't want to.
Yeah, I just don't feel able to take part in this meeting anymore.
Together we'll fly. Together we'll fly.
What was she being arrested for?
Ask them.
Being a woman, eh, Judy?
Oh, my God. Is this what they pay you for? Is this how you pay off your mortgages?
But it has to do with you recording a warning to us. I want to give him a warning. And you don't want it.
Right.
You only want the one side in any case. We know whose side you're on. It's quite evident to us whose side you're on. You're on the side of suicide, genocide and homicide. We're on the side that wants to save this planet and this world.
Because I didn't find out until I got here what learning there is here, you know, what things you can learn. Just by living differently, you get so trapped into to this way that you've got to be, you know, and the values that you're supposed to have and everything. Your values change here, and you're bound to take that back with you, you know. Everyone seems to care about one another, you know, if anybody's hurt, like, you know, everyone's sort of caring. It's amazing.
December 1987, the INF Treaty was signed, scrapping land-based cruise, Pershing and SS-20 missiles.
I think we could say we played a part in getting rid of cruise missiles. I think equally important was the solidarity amongst women. A lot of women, myself included, hadn't done things in an all-women's group before, hadn't realised how powerful it could be, that you all had an equal voice and everybody was listened to and encouraged to take part.
It made me laugh when the INF agreement happened, and, you know, the sort of political leaders were saying, oh yes, it had nothing at all to do with the peace movement, they didn't affect our decision at all in the slightest, and I don't believe that for a second. There were times when you felt you could do anything, and there were times when you got up and you did.
It gave a lot of women the chance to travel and meet people, and it gave a lot of women the chance to get politicised. It's very interesting to see women who were just shy and retiring go on to get degrees, become lawyers, become lecturers. Because take it from me, Greenham women are everywhere.
I ask you, which side are you on? Which side are you on? Are you on the other side from us? Which side are you on? And just think about it. Which side are you on? Which side are you on? Are you on the other side from us? Which side are you on?
Are you on the side of death or are you on the side of life? That's the only decision you have to make, pals.
It was not only the women at Greenham Gates who were causing NATO trouble. Cruisewatch members like Bruce Appleton and Evelyn Parker caused havoc beyond them.
The idea was that at a time of international tension, the missiles would actually be taken away from the base and dispersed into the countryside for miles and miles away from Greenham in all different directions, so that the missiles themselves and the base at Greenham were not a direct target. That was the theory. And they would have to train off base, they would have to simulate hiding in the countryside, melting in the countryside, was the way that Michael Heseltine put it at the time. And we would set out to prove that that actually was a fallacy, that it couldn't be done.
The telephone tree was absolutely critical for the way Cruisewatch functioned. As long as people could pass on a message very quickly, you could get a very large number of people out and campaigning within a short space of time. We were very good at getting the message to a long distance away. The radio system that we used, the CBs, was also critical when you were actually monitoring the convoy where it was in the plantations or on Salisbury Plain. So it was quite a community on the air, and we all had different names so we could identify each other. We actually, most of us chose herb names. There was daisy, town clock, dandelion, saffron, moonflower.
Message to all herbs. The convoy is now 3 miles north of Bullington.
There's a motorcyclist going through on the inside. They're weaving about. The police are trying to stop us catching up with the convoy. They're weaving in and out of private vehicles. They're all mixed up. We're all doing about 55 miles an hour. We were doing more just now, and the convoy's still pulling away. This is incredible. There's 256 megatons of nuclear weapons ahead. There are lorries of 58 tons that we're going past people's homes feet away, and there's ordinary people in cars here, all mixed up. It's incredible. There's some protesters on the side here waving. I mean, where do they come from? They're in the middle of nowhere. We're slowing down. They're holding us back again. Can we get through on the left? Go on, go! Stop. They've got us.
It's important that in a group like that, you have your different roles and nobody's too sort of self-important, so, you know, we're holier than thou and all that sort of thing. We all had to pull together and do what we were best at. And some people were best at driving all night, and other people were best at climbing in through the fences and actually getting into the cabs of the vehicles. So there was a wide range of activities that went on, and we all supported each other. People just acted together, and we weren't into hierarchy. It was a loose network of people acting very powerfully.
The basis of what Cruisewatch did went on for about 7 years. We got quite good at it. They stopped going anywhere but the Salisbury Plain because there was no point in trying to hide from us. We felt we'd trained them to make life easier for us. We couldn't believe that NATO, the glory of the West, had set up this system which was so easy to bust. A well-organised brownie pack could have done it.
3 trailers, 4 trailers.
And a Morris Minor.
5 trailers. Dodges with trailers, this is 6.
By the mid-80s, the UK had willingly turned itself into an unsinkable aircraft carrier, with US bases of every kind on board, as one protester at USAF Croughton explained to a rather uncommunicative guard.
We wondered if you're aware that there were more than 160 US bases and facilities in Britain altogether. Did you have any idea it was that many? This is part of a network which we're hoping to highlight this weekend by having actions at each one of the 160 US bases and facilities to show that we would have no control over our own country in a time of crisis, and that time of crisis would be decided by the American president and not our own government.
So we're going to have to ask you to move because you're blocking the inbound traffic.
I mean, do you realize...
Lack of communication, i.e. secrecy, became a feature of the nuclear state. Phone tapping, mail tampering and surveillance occurred. Life, in general, became uncertain.
Well, of course, Barry is one of the docks that will be completely taken over by the Americans in, well, an emergency. Any nuclear emergency, any international tension that becomes sufficiently serious could result in bar plan being put into operation, which means we could be evicted from our houses could be knocked down, you know, to make fire zones, and we would have not only no compensation, but the Americans would have powers of instant arrest, and I believe in certain circumstances execution.
At Chilwell in Nottinghamshire in 1984, a mass trespass was planned.
What human beings need, what local people need in this town, is homes and jobs and services. What they definitely do not need is another American base. By actually getting onto that base ourselves and perhaps planting trees or having picnics or doing whatever we wanted, it was symbolically, but also in a very direct way, reclaiming it for ourselves. On Saturday night, I think what we all felt was we've won now, as long as it remains non-violent. That we've done everything. It's a success as long as it remains non-violent, even if no one gets in. So the fact that it remained non-violent and people did get in made it everything we could have dreamed of. The Derby Evening Telegraph actually said correctly that over 1,000 people have trespassed. Most other press have used the MOD figure of 300, which is nonsense. You know, there were, at any one point you maybe have 300-400 people actually running on. When you heard it over the radio, the guy was the steward at the co-op, and he was going, oh, the fence is coming down! Oh my God, the whole fence is coming down! There's hundreds of people running in! Like in the background, there's this clapping and cheering, and all you've got it on the radio, you know. Oh, it was really beautiful. You know.
In Scotland, Trident drew campaigners like William Peden to Faslane on the Clyde to a camp still very much alive.
Faslane Peace Camp has always been important to me for a number of reasons. One is the close proximity to the actual nuclear-powered submarines, Trident submarines themselves, and how you can literally just step outside your caravan in the morning and confront the workers who are going in to build warheads to get on patrol with Trident submarines. It's important because it's a mixed camp, which has got its problems, but it's also got its bonuses in that it was welcoming to everyone. We used to end up as being a local care centre for drunks and drug addicts because the police didn't have a facility. We actually acted as quite a sort of like an important linchpin in the community, in the sense of sort of like, you know, getting on really well with the police and helping the police out and the social services and all sorts of other things. I think they were the first police station to actually serve vegetarian and vegan food, and you'd actually go out to the local restaurants, especially for us basically. We even got to the stage where the post office recognised this. Now it's been 16 years since it's been first set up. It's now got showers, it's now got running hot water. It is the only legal peace camp left. It is the only focal point where over the years we've had cherry trees that are now reaching sort of like full growth that have been planted by the Abaksha from Japan. I mean, we've had people who've come over to visit for a week and stayed for 2 years because it just gets them emotionally. And it'd be a really, really sad day if that ever went, because you do get people coming from all over the world who have heard about Faslane Peace Camp and just want to come and pay homage.
Molesworth in Cambridgeshire was the other site in the UK expected to take cruise missiles. 64 were due in 1988. The camp set up there led to a major confrontation in 1985.
9 months ago, on February the 6th, our so-called Defence Secretary, Michael Heseltine, put on his flak jacket and went out into the dead of night and sent 1,500 troops to forcibly evict the peace campers, Quakers and Rainbow villagers who had made their home at Molesworth. And after they'd evicted the dissidents, they threw up a 10-foot-high razor-wire fence around the base. And they trampled underfoot the wheat for Eritrea that had been growing there, and they covered the peace chapel that had been built in tangles of barbed wire. Their aim was simple. It was to extinguish our resistance, but it didn't work. Our resistance carries on.
1 year later, in Arctic weather, CND organised a non-violent blockade of the base's 4 gates, one of which was women only. Molesworth was closed for the day. The demonstrators ended the protest by facing the base in silence for 3 minutes and walking away together singing. The collective and individual campaigning of marches, demos, camps, petitions, letters and much more created an awareness of peace issues that coloured the wider culture. For many, nothing was more happily emblematic of this than the Glastonbury Festival, the inspiration of Micheal Eavis.
1981, I decided to talk to Bruce Kent. So I went to see him and we went through the nuts and bolts of an arrangement whereby they publicised it for us and everything. And we provide some money at the end of the day, and we get the bands and musicians to play for very little on the basis of the fact that they were supporting the peace movement.
And support they did. Jackson Brown, Van Morrison, Elvis Costello, Peter Gabriel, Joan Baez, the Communards and many others.
Glastonbury! Are we all in the mood for having some fun? I didn't hear that. I said, are we all in the mood for having some fun? Well, as you can see, the old band has got down, so I'm going to ask you all to do something. And that is to get down, get down, get down.
The first song was £20,000, so I whipped it off to London. I gave it to Bruce Kent, took it out in carry bags and things, said, look, this is our profit, you have it. So that money paid for the trains, actually brought the trains down from the north of England for the demonstrations. So we must have given CND about $1 million altogether, I would have thought.
More people required better facilities, bringing yet another barnstorming hassle with planners.
I decided to build a pyramid stage. The planner said, do you need planning permission for this? And I said, well, it's a farm building at the moment. We're going to put cows in the winter and stuff. So I went to the ladies to start with, the ladies on the committee, and said, isn't it wonderful, isn't it fantastic? And they said, yeah, it is rather nice. And gradually I managed to persuade them all, bar about 3 of them, that it was a really good idea and that was a nice building.
Such charm was not quite so evident on the occasion when a light aircraft flew over the festival towing a banner declaring, "The Kremlin loves you." Somewhat non-peace-like tactics were employed with the help of the festival fireworks.
I'm a bit stroppy about this airplane. I said to I phoned the pilot bloke, do you want a chance of reaching that plane, you see? With the rockets, with the 70-pounders? And he said, yeah, I'll give it a go. It's about the 4th time coming round with his trailer. Off went the rocket and exploded right in the middle of the airplane. Everybody in the crowd just cheered their heads off. It wasn't life-threatening stuff. It might have been, but it wasn't. He never came back again.
Folk singer-writer Maria Tolley decided to enter a GLC competition to write a song for peace.
The song that I wrote was about ordinary children in Britain thinking about what they would like best, and what they would like best would be a future. And that meant they wanted peace. So I went to a local school just up the road, And I went there and asked if I might come in and teach this song to the children who were in the first year, that is the 11 and 12-year-olds. So I was invited in, and we made a cassette of this song and sent it up, and to my absolute surprise, I won. Invited to speak on, I think it was LBC. I was asked about it and asked about the children and so on, and I just said why the words were what they were. Why did a child want a future? Well, what happened after that was that the GLC was inundated with phone calls by enraged mothers and fathers who objected to children being used and exploited in order to say things which were political. But it was an extraordinary business, absolutely extraordinary, because the words are not what I would call political at all. They're just pure common sense.
I don't need 3 wishes, I need only one. I want my future, and that means peace.
Away from the classroom, the struggle for hearts and minds continued. Writer Bel Mooney remembers Raymond Briggs' powerful Where the Wind Blows.
I found this a most marvellous and moving book, and my son was 8, and I showed it to my son. It showed with tenderness and compassion for the ignorance of the hapless people in the cartoon strip exactly what would happen to millions and millions of people like them all over the world if the warmongers had their way. I think it's interesting that the Briggs contribution stands out, because at the beginning of the 80s, looking back, I think it's quite surprising that more writers and playwrights weren't producing more creatively. And not many people did it. People like Angela Carter wrote marvellous essays and so on, but didn't actually write a novel about the nuclear threat. Martin Amis wrote Einstein's Monsters at the end of the decade, and it wasn't a big work. Looking back, it's as if the writers didn't quite take it on board, but documentary makers and filmmakers did. Jonathan Dimbleby's The Bomb, and The War Game was being shown on the circuit. And then there was a sort of comedy thing called Whoops Apocalypse on the TV, and there was, of course, Dr. Strangelove. That was quite a rich vein. I think there was a polarisation. You had some documentary makers and others within the BBC and ITV, some journalists, actors, some writers, what you might call the liberal establishment, saying, yes, this is a matter of acute concern, that the Cold War game is pushing us to the brink and this cannot be allowed to go on. But at the same time, your political establishment in this country and your journalistic establishment doing what they always do, which is to pour scorn on those who are trying to blow the whistle.
Even if a major anti-war novel never emerged, writers were not entirely silent. Over 200 signed an appeal by European authors in 1982, including Beryl Bainbridge, Melvyn Bragg, John Fowles, Doris Lessing and Arnold Wesker. Amongst the poets that found a voice was Adrian Henri, here reciting Morning in the Suburbs.
The end of the world will surely come, in Bromley South or Orpington. Morning in the suburbs. Sunlight thrown like a blanket over pink and white vistas. Villas detached and undetached, islanded with flowering cherry. Stone ravens guard the gate posts, the roof left unguarded. Each man's garden a province unto itself, linked only by bird song and the tasteful cooing of doves in hedges. The earth moves sudden. Tiny snowstorms of cherry blossom. A black cat runs apprehensive, flocks of starlings startled from bushes, slow-growing crescendo of crushing picture windows, gardens uprooted, blown, pink and white, sky-high, frozen agonies of begonias, held for a moment like a blurred Polaroid, lawns flung like carpets, golf clubs, potting sheds, wheeled shopping baskets, hurled into orbit. Deep freezers burst open, pre-packaged meals spilling everywhere, invitations to whist drives, coffee mornings, letters to long-haired sons at campus universities never to be delivered, pinboards, posters of Che Guevara, stereo systems, continental quilts, rows of neat lettuces, blameless chihuahuas, au pair girls still wet from dreams of Italian waiters, mothers-in-law, bullfight trophies, sensible wooden toys, world helpless in a vortex, rockeries like asteroids, blizzards of apple blossom against the April sunlight. A solitary picnicker, sitting on the breakwater above the red flint-strewn beach, hears a distant thunder as cliff tops crumble, looks up from the light stumbling the silver water to see the horizon catch fire. Showers of small stones, smell of uprooted samphire, the last slice of ham, a packet of biscuits, the small black notebook slip away unseen as the concrete rears vertical. His ears last echo the cries of lost seabirds. One drifting pink petal catches the dying sunlight.
In the field of classical music, Michael Berkeley composed an acclaimed oratorio, Or Shall We Die?
I think it managed to focus and to put into music the feelings of an awful lot of people. We all felt that this was something that needed saying. We felt passionately that it needed saying. That the world was in a worrying condition, that somebody could all too easily press a button and we'd end up destroying ourselves. People were sort of toying with cruise missiles as though they were little soldiers on a board game. And there was just the feeling that was the sort of people that were in power, that something could go catastrophically wrong, and that we, as you know, the people down in the street, needed to voice our feelings in some way. And of course we did it in lots of ways, but this was just one. This was a musician's response.
As the peace movement spread to become a social force, it naturally overspilled geographical borders to make strong links with campaigners in other Western countries. But especially important, many travelled behind the Iron Curtain to find out for themselves the reality of life in the evil empire. Caroline Westgate wrote about a visit to Moscow.
climbed the 3 flights of stairs to the front door of the flat, my eyes gradually getting used to the late evening gloom. The smell of cabbage came from little dustbins on the landings. The door I wanted was panelled with vinyl, someone trying to add a bit of style, and had a spy hole. Galia's delight at my arrival dispels all my apprehension. She's in her 20s, slim and pretty, wearing a red apron over her dark dress. She takes my coat and bustles me into the brightly lit living room. The window is open, revealing the 6-inch double glazing. I feel very at home in this room. It's comfortably shabby and the furnishings are haphazard. There are 2 big armchairs with turquoise stretch covers, a daybed covered with a rug, and an old oval table with a tapestry cloth. A big TV with 1950s-ish metal legs stands in a corner. She makes tea and serves it in a pretty porcelain teapot, which has a tiny strainer fitted to the end of the spout. Sweets are served, and a big square sponge cake covered with layers of marshmallow and chocolate. We drink to peace and friendship. We eat slowly and talk a lot. She wants to know all about our daily life, to take a peep out of her locked box into ours. How much would it cost to rent this apartment in England? What proportion of our income is spent on gas, electricity and rent? She's astonished it's all so expensive. She's animated, but not excitable, listening to all I have to say, and tells me a bit about herself. She's not married, and she works as a cashier in a hotel. I ask her about the emancipation of Soviet women, and whether the nurseries are good. Do party members get better provision? Galia will perhaps want to give the best impression of her country's arrangements. It's all part of being hospitable. I produce some gifts from a relative in England. They turn out to be pretty inappropriate. A cassette tape, but she doesn't have a player, and a digital watch, but it hasn't any instructions, and I haven't a clue how it works. We don't have technology here, she says resignedly. I offer to take the watch and find someone who can set it back at the hotel. At one point she asks if I've heard that a decree is about to come on the statute books, which would make it illegal to have contact like this with Western visitors. And then, pointing to a 2-pin socket on the wall, she says, "Of course, that's a KGB bug." We laugh. We arrange to meet again in a couple of days' time. It's about 1 a.m. and there are very few people about in this part of the city. I leave her with warm handshakes. I take the lift again and hurry across the courtyard to the street to hail a taxi. We've experienced a simple but profound intimacy that makes a mockery of all that divides us. A whole nation in all its complexity has been obscured behind the label enemy. The Soviets are doing exactly the same thing, only they built a wall, which is cruder. Western leaders are fond of pointing to the wall as the main cause of the Cold War, but our walls are there too, and they're more pernicious because they've been built in our minds, and we don't even notice that they're there.
Many such encounters took place over much of East Europe, but it fell especially to END, European nuclear disarmament, to form an intentional political context. Mary Kaldor was one of its founders.
There was an analysis which was developed that the Cold War was actually not really a conflict. It was 2 ideologies that reinforced each other. And in fact, both the Soviet Union and the United States and NATO had a mutual interest in having an enemy for domestic political reasons. So I think the argument of END was that both sides held responsibility. Edward Thompson, who I think was incredibly prescient, saw this not just as an anti-nuclear movement, but an anti-Cold War movement. And he envisaged a movement of citizens across the blocs. And I think the END appeal, which was launched in 1980, was really the mobilizing document of the movement. Although CND was a separate organization, and although there were lots of different groups all over Europe, the END appeal was definitely the mobilizing document of the movement, not just in Britain, but also in the rest of Europe. The sentence in the appeal that was to be taken up, especially by groups in Eastern Europe, was we must commence to act as if a united, neutral and Pacific Europe already exists. We must learn to be loyal not to East or West but to each other, and we must disregard the prohibitions and limitations imposed by any national state. We must defend the right of all citizens to take part in this common movement and to engage in every kind of exchange.
In particular, END was keen to foster meetings with the emerging small groups in East Europe working for peace independently of the official, communist-backed peace committees, and risking official displeasure. Writer Ian McEwan.
I remember trooping out to the far-flung suburbs to cross muddy fields to go up to the 15th floor of a tiny apartment, crowd into the kitchen, and then have an absolutely brilliant evening and come away feeling undying love for very brave intellectuals that you'd spent your time drinking with, knowing that you were followed there, that the people who'd followed you knew exactly which apartment you'd gone to, that your visit was going to cause them great inconvenience. They really stick in my mind.
One such group was the Moscow-based Group to Establish Trust Between East and West, founded in 1982.
Most people from our group are optimists, but we have to look at reality. And reality is that most part of the group probably would be jailed very soon.
Artist Sergei Batovrin.
There's a campaign of slander in Soviet press already. And well, according to history of KGB repressions, it means that after the articles like this appears in Soviet press, the arrest will be. But still, we believe that what we had done was not in vain, because people will find different measures, different actions, and it would be wrong to think that we are isolated now, that everyone is scared, everyone's frightened, and no one will do anything. Of course, general public is afraid of taking part in our activity, but still there is a lot of people who will try to do something, even if we will be jailed.
And Sergei was right. Jail, confinement in mental hospital, house arrest, and intimidation followed. For Western visitors, things were scary, but usually far less hazardous. Bugged meetings, confiscated literature, a lost visa. But as Barbara Einhorn, visiting a group of women pacifists in East Berlin, discovered, things could be much worse.
I met with them twice during that week in December 1983. The tension was electric because 10 days prior to my visit, the Bundestag had agreed to station Cruisewatch Pershing II, and the East Germans had retaliated by agreeing to station SS-21s and 22s on their territory. At the end of the week, when I went to leave to go to West Berlin, they were waiting for me at the border. And we got into an unmarked car, and at some point they gave me a pair of black glasses and said, "Put these on." And I said, "But I can't see anything." And they said, "Precisely." And I mean, it was really like a B-grade spy movie, you can imagine. I was sort of pushed into a room with two very unpleasant women guards. Anyway, they said, "Undress and put on prison garb." So I began to think, this is more serious than I thought. In the end, I was only there for 5 days, which, you know, seems like nothing in retrospect, except that they charged me with treason, paragraph 99, subsection 1. And the paragraph had a sentence of 2 to 12 years on it. It was an interesting concept, I thought, even at the time, as to how you could commit treason against somebody else's country. I spent 10 to 14 hours a day with my interrogator, and then on the last day he called me in. What did I have to say to my crime? I said, as far as I was aware, I hadn't committed any crime. This guy went apoplectic. I thought he was going to have a stroke. He went completely purple in the face and started shouting at me. I should examine my conscience and I should think this through very carefully because I had, in fact, committed a crime. And then all of a sudden he said, "But you know, the GDR is very humane and you've got 2 small children at home and we're releasing you today at 12 o'clock. And sure enough, I was thrown into another cell. They threw my clothes at me. I was out of there, basically, very quickly. I think that although we were aware of the Stasi and that we took what we thought were sensible precautions, because we had the view that we had nothing to hide, and because we really didn't take ourselves perhaps so seriously, I think we totally underestimated their view of us, which was as a real danger to their state.
As the 80s developed, this became more apparent. Meanwhile, such confrontation did not go down well either with some in the peace movement at home who were inclined to excuse Soviet responsibility for the Cold War. They would have rather seen END courting the official peace committees, who were only too willing to co-opt Western groups under their peace banner. This was resisted, but doors were kept open if only to secure visas for future visits. Sometimes, however, official meetings, such as to the Soviet Union of Writers, proved memorable. Ian McEwan again.
It was one of those typical evenings of sweet Georgian champagne and icy, delicious vodka and incredible cooking, real caviar. And every few minutes, as the evening wore on, toasts to literature, to freedom, to friendship, to glasnost, to perestroika. Then I found myself, 4 hours in, wildly proposing toasts of my own, getting in the spirit of the thing. And my host proposed a toast to Gorbachev, and he said, "It is a brave man who puts his shoulder to the stone-heavy wheel of the Soviet Empire and tries to shift it an inch." I remember him walking me to the lavatories, which in themselves were as sumptuous as a railway station. He put his huge bear-like arm round my shoulder and said, "McEwan, I like you." I can say with dead certainty I'd never drunk so much in my life, and I never have since.
One established social area of relative independence in East European states was the church, tolerated on a tight rein. This provided a valuable foothold for those like Stephen Tunnicliffe seeking to open up connections.
The point we were trying to make in END, in the Christian part of END, was that we were prepared to talk to people who were accepted officially, including the official so-called peace movement, which was a very one-sided, government-dominated affair in all the East European countries, and the independents. There was a strong independent movement in Hungary, and the only way in which we could gain access to it was to play along with the official peace movement. And I was able to persuade a bishop of the Reformed Church in Hungary by the name of Bishop Tóth, very much an accepted figure amongst the authorities, that we ought to be able to do a joint conference in Budapest when we could bring together peace activists and theologians.
In East Germany, the church provided an even more fruitful opportunity for change.
The Protestant church in East Germany was very much more critical of the build-up of weapons than, in fact, the Protestant church in West Germany. They were leaders of Christian opposition to weapons in the communist countries. There was one church in East Berlin which became a center for the peace movement because the pastor there had been in prison with Honecker, the leader of the Communist Party in East Germany, and therefore had a certain amount of freedom of action. In particular, he was very supportive of the movement which got the name of Swords into Ploughshares. But the Swords into Ploughshares movement became a peace movement very critical of the establishment, and therefore very much frowned upon by the authorities and hounded by the Stasi. In fact, at one time, the members were forbidden by law to wear their Swords into Ploughshares badges, and they solved this problem by cutting out a hole on their whatever they were wearing in the shape of the badge, and the hole was there, and everybody knew, in fact, that that meant the Swords into Ploughshares badge.
This symbolic act epitomized a major problem. Making links was always subject to the space allowed by an all-pervasive state. Effective campaigning for peace required the basic right of freedom of speech. Ironically, Thatcher and Reagan waving the banner of freedom seemed more attractive to some independents than groups like END talking of peace.
All the way through the Cold War period, human rights had been used as an ideological tool by the West, and peace had been used as an ideological tool by the East. And so as long as the peace movement in the West just stuck to peace, then it was easy for them to be fitted into this good-bad binary worldview as part of the other side, and therefore marginalised and dismissed. And as long as the opposition in Eastern Europe stuck to their position of only human rights, equally they could be treated as agents of the West, just as we were treated as agents of the Kremlin. And by bringing us together, that created a whole new dynamic. On the one hand, it was impossible for us in the peace movement to be accused of being agents of the Kremlin when we were seen to be supporting opposition in Eastern Europe. And at the same time, the idea of independent peace movements in Eastern Europe opened up a space that was not possible as long as they were purely human rights movements.
Nowhere was this ideological knot more evident than in relation to the Czech dissident human rights group Charter 77, of which Dana Tomin was a member. Its aim was to press for the implementation of the 1975 Helsinki Accords, signed by the Soviet bloc, granting basic freedoms.
There was, to be quite honest, a lot of mistrust and prejudice on the dissident side. They saw the peace movements as complete Soviet apologists, people who were only dealing with the communist parties because peace committees were nothing else but an outfit of the communist parties. People who didn't understand that peace and freedom were indivisible, yes, but we had to have a just peace. People often refused to actually talk with the peace movements at the beginning, including END. These are pro-Soviet idiots. But diplomacy worked. People who really were interested in how we can bring Europe together, people who understood that the process from below at that time was at least as important as the process from the top. The citizens' war for peace was as important as anything else, and perhaps even more important. It took a while to understand that you cannot have peace without freedom and democracy, but you also cannot have freedom and democracy if you constantly at the threshold of a nuclear war or any other war. And to actually understand both viewpoints and get together on this was the most important thing that happened.
This alliance made a major contribution to building trust and helping create the space and leadership able to steer the later events of 1989. But there were other strands of activity too.
END really consisted of two things. It consisted of a small group of intellectuals in Britain around a magazine, and it consisted of the annual conventions which brought together peace movements from all over Europe, particularly the churches in Holland and the Greens in Germany.
Important fresh ideas emerged relating directly to disarmament.
I mean, one body of ideas was the idea throughout the peace movement of defensive defence, of the fact that you don't need overkill. And although those ideas were not accepted in the West, they were taken up by Gorbachev when he came to power and enabled him to accept the arms control agreements that were on the table. I mean, the Americans had offered the zero option, which meant no cruise missiles and no SS-20s, in the belief that the Russians would never accept it because they had so many more SS-20s. But in fact, once you'd accepted the argument that you can't kill the world more than several times over, there was no reason not to accept those, and that really created a breakthrough in East-West relations.
This led concretely to the signing of the INF Treaty. Mient Jan Faber of the Dutch church group IKV received first-hand confirmation of this.
I mean, Richard Pearl, the Prince of Darkness, who was the Deputy Secretary of Defense in America, I mean, he told that it was really because of the pressure of the peace movement that we came up with this kind of proposals. We hadn't expected that the Russians would ever accept it. But on the other hand, the advisors, in particular the people who were still on board when Gorbachev came to power, they told us exactly the same. We thought that your proposals were so interesting that we had to be serious about it. And so in a sense, so there was an influence there. And of course, the other thing we did was that by making visible that there were dissidents in the East, giving them a voice, many people became aware, in the East in particular, but also in the West, that communism was dead. And also the officials became aware that it was really dead, that they couldn't stop this kind of networking between people of East and West. And it was not only some groups like END and IKV who were doing that, but there were a lot of local churches who were doing the same. There were a lot of municipalities who were doing the same. So there was really a quite substantive movement from below going on. And I think it had an incredible impact.
Historians have yet to reach a definitive verdict as to how the Cold War ended in 1989 as the Berlin Wall fell, announcing the end of communism. NATO triumphalists may point to the inevitable victory of Western values and its superior economic and technological systems. More realistic observers will point to the inner decay of the whole Soviet structure. and its unilateral withdrawal from the military spending that weakened it. One phrase that will recur is people power, rightly recognized in the domino-like collapse of East European totalitarianism. What will be more reluctantly acknowledged is the expression of people power through the 80s in the West as a vibrant and creative peace movement that harried and exposed a bellicose alliance with campaigns of education and direct action. Bruce Kent.
It was a most extraordinary time. There was an enormous sense of vigour, and we had this astonishing experience of finding that we were sitting on a volcano of public opinion. We've certainly put nuclear weapons back on the agenda, and nobody can say exactly because this happened, therefore that followed. But when you get to a world now where a whole range of ex-generals and admirals now repudiate nuclear weapons, they're not weapons at all, they're weapons of unintelligent suicide, I think we contributed to a change of climate.
From somewhat sunnier times, it's possible to look back.
The most bizarre experience I had was going to the General Assembly of the United Nations for the 82 special session on disarmament, and I was linked up by telephone with the crowd in Hyde Park, and the operator came on and said, "You are now talking to 250,000 people in Hyde Park," and I had to make a great sort of uplifting, ranting speech down this telephone. But the high for me was the sense of almost Freemasonry, that you could land up in any town anywhere and someone would take you off to supper and someone else would give you a room for the night and someone else would drive you to the train the next morning and so on if you were staying the night. And these people you probably never see again, but they were all part of the great family. It was a great family feeling.
I remember giving in a petition to Michael Heseltine on the steps of the MOD, and we had to go up with Suggs and Paul Weller, and it was the, absolute peak of my life up to that moment.
I was standing in a ploughed field. It was a freezing, literally freezing cold night. And I remember standing there thinking, it's about 2 a.m. What am I doing at my age, standing here with a bag of paint in my hand? And then the convoy came and I knew what I was doing.
I didn't have the same youth as my mates did.
Yeah.
I sometimes think I missed out on having what was an ordinary youth.
This is why you come to Manchester United later in life.
well, yeah. In many ways, that's it. Yeah. I mean, I would have loved to have gone to watch United.
Yes.
But felt that I can't do that. Yeah.
I'm saving the planet.
But before we get too nostalgic, some things have not changed. September 1998 at the gates of Vickers Shipyard, Barrow, during the launching of Vengeance, the 4th Trident submarine.
We're the Citizens Inspection Team. We're acting lawfully as global citizens. We have reason to believe that you have a Trident nuclear weapons system within this complex. We must warn you that any action by yourselves to impede our access to these facilities for the purpose of this inspection would put you also in contravention of international law. Please let us through.
I'm sorry, I can't allow you access to the premises.
We need to come in, I'm sorry. It is a serious legal implication. We do need to come through these gates.
Well, I'm afraid I can't allow you in, and we'll have to agree to differ.
The USA still maintains its military presence in Britain. At Menwith Hill in Yorkshire, Command and Control Centre, an old dream of Ronald Reagan is yet alive. Helen Johns has a peace camp there.
The base itself is the largest spy base outside the United States for America. Used to predominantly spy on the former Soviet Union, but since the collapse of the Cold War, and even before then, it started literally spying on everybody else. It intercepts all of the telecommunications in the Northern Hemisphere. And the most horrifying information is that the Star Wars program, far from being dead, has never had a dollar removed from its budget. It was simply called Strategic Missile Defense. And now, by the year 2003, the United States plans to have nuclear-powered laser systems in space that will effectively help them to dominate the whole area of space and effectively dominate the planet with all of us below.
Worldwide, there are some 25,000 warheads active, and more are being added to the stockpile by states with nuclear axes to grind: India, Pakistan, Israel. This will only end when individuals, as in the 80s, realize their responsibility for the nuclear arms race and speak out. Mordecai Vanunu did. He exposed Israel's nuclear policy and paid for it with prison. Susannah York reads his poem.
I am the clerk, the technician, the mechanic, the driver, whom they told, do this or do that. Don't look to the right, to the left. Don't eye the page. Don't look at the whole machine. You are responsible for one bolt only. You are responsible for just one rubber stamp. Concern yourself with one matter only. Don't bother with the things that are above you. Don't think for us. Keep going. On. On. The great, the wise, the futurists thought, there is nothing to worry about. No fear. Everything works, clicks. Our little clerk is a diligent worker. He's a simple technician. He's the little guy. Like all low-ranking clerks, ears have they, but they hear not. Eyes have they, but they see not. We have a head, not the little guys. Answer them, he thought to himself, just between him and himself, the little citizen. But the man with the head is not little. Who is the boss here? Who knows where the train is headed? Where is their head? I've got a head too. Why do I see the entire machine? Why do I see the abyss? Does this train have an engineer? The clerk, driver, technician, mechanic raised his head. He took one step back, saw a monster. Unbelieving, he rubbed his eyes, and indeed, it's okay. I'm okay. I really do see a monster. I am part of the system. I signed this form. And only now am I reading the text. This bolt is part of a bomb. This bolt is me. How did I not see? And how do others go on bolt tightening? Who else knows? Who saw? Who heard? The Emperor is indeed naked. I see him. Why, me? This is not for me. It's too big for me. Arise and cry out. Arise and tell this people, you can. I, the bolt, the mechanic, the technician. Yes, you. You are the secret agent of this nation. You are the eyes of the state. Spy, agent, reveal what you've seen. Reveal to us what the knowing, the wise are hiding from us. If not for you, the abyss awaits us. A holocaust awaits us. You, and only you, sit at the wheel and see the abyss. I have no choice. I'm a little guy, a citizen, an ordinary fellow. But I will do my duty. I have heard the voice of my conscience, and there's nowhere to run. It's a small world, small against Big Brother. Here I am at your service. Here I am doing my job. Take it away from me. Come and judge, lighten my load, bear it with me. Carry on my work. Stop the train. Get off the train. The next stop is nuclear holocaust. The next book. The next machine. No, there is no such thing.